She's just the analyst. Keep her out of the way. Those were the last words Marcus Webb said before 8 Navy SEALs got trapped in a mountain ambush with no way out. The enemy had prepared everything. Every exit, every angle, every route of escape was covered. Men who had survived 17 deployments were running out of options. Then the intelligence officer nobody had spoken to since the helicopter, the woman carrying the tablet, the one Webb had dismissed with a single sentence, quietly disappeared into the tree line. 18 minutes later, 10 enemy combatants were down. And not one SEAL on that mountain had fired a single shot. Don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. She sat in the back of the helicopter and nobody talked to her. That was the first thing Captain Olivia Carter noticed when she boarded the MH-60 Black Hawk at 0200 hours on a Tuesday morning at Naval Special Warfare Base, Coronado, California. 8 Navy SEALs loaded their gear, checked their weapons, exchanged the kind of quiet nods that only men who have bled together can fully understand, and not one of them acknowledged the woman sitting 3 feet away with a standard-issue intelligence kit bag between her boots. She didn't blame them. She had been through this before. She would go through it again. What she did not do was look away. She watched them. She studied the way they moved, the way they checked their equipment, the specific sequence each man used to verify his gear. She was reading them the same way she would later read the battlefield, methodically, quietly, and with a level of detail that nobody around her understood she was capable of. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Hayes sat across from her and reviewed his tablet without looking up. I was 38 years old, built like a man who had never taken a day off in his life, with the kind of controlled calm that came not from the absence of fear, but from years of learning to live inside it. He had been on 17 deployments. He had operated in places that didn't exist on any map you could find in a public library. He was, by any measure, one of the finest special operations commanders in the United States military. He had not read her full file. That would matter later. The mission briefing had described her role in 3 words: intelligence support asset. She would accompany the team into the field, process real-time data, analyze enemy movement patterns, and communicate threat assessments back to the forward operating base. She would stay behind the main element. She would stay out of the way. She would, as one of the other operators had already muttered loud enough for her to hear, hold the clipboard while we do the actual work. His name was Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb. He was 29 years old, had 8 confirmed combat deployments, and possessed the particular kind of confidence that sometimes looks exactly like arrogance, until the day it doesn't. He had made the comment about the clipboard without looking at her, speaking instead to the operator beside him, a tall, quiet man named Rodriguez, who had simply nodded once and said nothing. Olivia had heard it. She had said nothing. Because Olivia Carter had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing a person can be is underestimated. And the most powerful thing you can do with that underestimation is let it breathe, let it grow. Let the people around you build their assumptions as high as they want to build them. Because the higher they build them, the harder those assumptions fall. She shifted her pack slightly and felt the familiar weight of it settle against her left shoulder. It was heavier than a standard intelligence kit. Significantly heavier. Nobody had asked about the weight. Nobody had noticed. Or if they had noticed, they had assumed she was simply carrying more equipment than necessary. The way desk assignment officers sometimes overpack for field operations because they don't know what they actually need. She knew exactly what she needed. The helicopter lifted off at 0218 hours and banked west toward the mountains. The insertion point was a flat clearing approximately 14 miles from the suspected enemy position. The team moved in silence, Hayes at the front, Webb and Rodriguez covering the flanks, and Olivia walking in the middle of the formation with her kit bag across her back and her eyes moving constantly. Not down at the ground the way an inexperienced operator might look. Not straight ahead the way an overconfident one might, but side to side, angled slightly upward, tracking the ridgeline, cataloging the terrain, building a 3-dimensional picture in her mind that she would need before this night was finished. She had done this in places these men had never been. She had done this before most of them had ever put on a uniform. But they didn't know that. Hayes set the pace and it was aggressive. He wasn't being unkind to her. He simply moved at the speed his team required, and if the intelligence officer couldn't keep up, that was a problem she would have to manage herself. 3 miles in one of the younger operators. A man named Kowalski glanced back and seemed genuinely surprised to find her there, moving at exactly the same pace, breathing through her nose, her face completely calm. He looked away quickly. She noticed. At mile 6, Hayes raised a fist and the team stopped in one fluid motion, every man dropping to a knee and facing outward within 2 seconds. Olivia stopped with them. She didn't have to be told. She read the signal the same way they did and responded the same way they did. And this time it was Rodriguez who looked at her just for a moment with something that wasn't quite respect yet, but was at least the beginning of attention. "Contact report," Hayes said quietly through the radio net. The forward operating base responded. "Enemy patrol movement detected 2 miles north. Possible repositioning. The team needed to hold. They held for 11 minutes in the dark. During those 11 minutes, Olivia was not idle. She pulled a small monocular from her chest pocket and scanned the northern tree line in a slow, systematic pattern. She wasn't looking for what was there. She was looking for what was wrong. There is a difference, and most people never learn it. You look for what's there, and you find what the enemy wants you to find. You look for what's wrong, and you find what they're trying to hide. Something was wrong. She couldn't name it yet. It was a feeling built from years of reading terrain, years of understanding how men move when they think they're invisible. Years of noticing the small violations, the branch that doesn't move. When the wind moves, everything else, the shadow that appears before the thing casting it. It was a whisper in her professional instincts, not a shout. "Not yet." She filed it away. They moved again at Hayes' signal. The reconnaissance objective was a series of structures built into the north side of a ridgeline approximately 3 miles from the nearest civilian population center. Intelligence suggested the structures housed a cell of approximately 12 to 15 individuals with connections to a network that had been planning coordinated attacks against critical infrastructure targets along the Pacific coast. Power grids, water treatment facilities, communication networks. The kind of targets that don't make dramatic headlines until the moment they go offline and 3 million people suddenly have no power in January. The SEAL's job was to confirm the target, gather imagery, collect signals, intelligence, and extract without being detected. Clean, professional, invisible. Olivia's job was to support that mission with analysis. But as she moved through the terrain, she was doing something else simultaneously. She was tracking the inconsistencies. The feeling that had whispered to her during the hold position was getting louder with every quarter mile. The forest was too quiet. Not the natural quiet of an undisturbed wilderness, but the deliberate quiet of a place where something was waiting. She keyed her radio softly. "Commander?" Hayes responded with 2 clicks. "Go ahead." The patrol movement, they reported to our north. It wasn't repositioning. A pause. "Say again." They weren't moving to a new position. They were clearing a lane, specifically the lane we're currently moving through. Another pause, longer this time. "Carter, on what basis are you?" The contact report timing. It came 14 minutes after insertion. We were already moving in a predictable direction based on the terrain. If someone wanted to ensure we stayed on this route rather than alternate, they would generate exactly this kind of patrol report. It doesn't push us back. It slows us down, keeps us in the channel. The radio went quiet for a moment. Then Hayes said, "Rodriguez, confirm terrain on our 9 o'clock. Rodriguez spent 30 seconds scanning. Then "Commander, possible covered position. 200 meters, can't confirm occupied." Olivia said nothing more. She didn't need to say, "I told you so." She never needed that. What she needed was for Hayes to begin thinking differently about the ground they were walking on. And she could hear in the slight change in his voice, the way his next command came just a half-second slower than usual, that he was already adjusting. The team modified their approach. They moved off the direct line and took a longer route through heavier vegetation, which cost them time but gave them angle. And as they flanked the position Rodriguez had identified, they passed close enough to confirm what Olivia had suspected. It was occupied. 2 men, 1 radio, positioned perfectly to observe the route the team had just abandoned. Nobody said anything. But Webb, walking 3 positions behind her, looked at the back of her head for a long moment with an expression that had changed considerably since the helicopter. They reached the observation point at 4:41 hours, 20 minutes before first light, and established a hasty position on the south face of a ridgeline that provided a clear sight line to the target structures below. Hayes directed the camera teams to begin collecting imagery, while Rodriguez and another operator named Daniels moved to establish a wider security perimeter. Olivia set up her intelligence station behind a natural rock formation and began processing data from the forward operating base, signals intercepts, pattern analysis. She worked with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times, her hands moving quickly across her equipment while her eyes continued to track the terrain around her. At 0503 hours, she noticed something that stopped her hands completely. She looked at the data again, then she looked at it a third time. Then she keyed her radio. "Commander, I need you to look at something." Hayes moved to her position. She turned the screen toward him. "These communications intercepts from the past 6 hours. Look at the timing pattern." He studied it. "What am I looking for?" "They stop," she said. "Every intercept we have from this network, they maintain a communication cycle every 40 to 50 minutes. Regular as a heartbeat. It's how they verify their positions are secure." She paused. "The last transmission was 83 minutes ago." Hayes looked at her. "They stopped talking," she said, "because they know we're here." The moment she said it, the first shot cracked through the morning air, and the ambush began. The initial volley came from 3 directions simultaneously, which told Olivia everything she needed to know about how carefully this had been prepared. Random fighters don't coordinate 3-directional fire within the first second of an ambush. Trained fighters do. Fighters who have rehearsed this specific scenario on this specific terrain for this specific target. They had been expected. Hayes was already moving, pulling his team into cover positions with the controlled urgency of a man who had survived ambushes before. "Security team left, security team right, Webb. I need suppression on that northern ridgeline now. Kowalski, get to the rocks. Martinez, where are you?" Voices overlapped, rounds cracked through branches and sparked off stone. The world became very loud and very fast and very small, contracted down to the nearest cover in the next 2 seconds. Olivia moved, not toward the fighting positions, not away from them either. She moved laterally, finding a depression in the ground behind the rock formation that gave her concealment and a view of the broader terrain. She dropped flat and looked, really looked, not at the muzzle flashes, which was where most people instinctively focused, at the spaces between them. Because the spaces between tell you more than the flashes themselves. She counted, she mapped, she built a picture. "Commander," she said into the radio, her voice was completely steady. "You have 7 active positions, 2 on your northern ridgeline, 2 at your 9 o'clock approximately 150 meters, 1 at your 3 o'clock behind the secondary rock formation, and 2 more that I believe are holding in reserve on the eastern slope." Hayes was behind cover 15 meters away. His voice was harder now, compressed by the weight of real combat. "Carter, I need you to—" "They are not trying to kill you right now," she said. "They are trying to hold you. Every position I see is oriented to contain your movement, not to advance on you. They want you in one place." The shooting continued around them, wood splintered, someone cursed. Hayes processed what she had said in the 3 seconds he could afford to give it, and then something shifted in his voice. "Say that again." "They're waiting for something to arrive," she said. "This is a holding action. The real threat isn't here yet." Hayes went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Webb, "Kowalski, hold your positions. No offensive movement." "Carter, how long do we have?" "I don't know," she said honestly, "but not long." The firefight settled into a brutal grinding rhythm. The enemy was disciplined. They weren't wasting ammunition and they weren't taking risks. They were doing exactly what she had described, maintaining pressure from fixed positions, preventing any breakout movement, and waiting. Webb attempted to reposition to a better angle on the northern ridgeline and was immediately forced back behind cover by accurate fire that came within inches of his left shoulder. He pressed himself against the rock and breathed hard through his teeth. "They know exactly where I'm going before I get there," he said. "How do they know?" "Because they've rehearsed this ground," Olivia answered through the radio. "Every position they're using covers a natural movement route. They didn't set this up in response to us. They set this up before we arrived. They have been waiting for this exact scenario." Another operator, Martinez, tried a different angle and received the same response. Immediate suppression. Perfectly timed, perfectly accurate. "We can't move," Hayes said. It wasn't a complaint, it was an assessment. The voice of a man counting his options and finding them fewer than he needed. Carter, tell me something useful. She was already gone. Nobody noticed her leave immediately. The firefight had every man focused on his own survival, and the intelligence officer was not a person anyone was tracking in that moment. She had slipped backward from her position in the depression, moved into heavier vegetation to the south, and was now moving uphill with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with escape. She was climbing. The pack on her back was heavy. The terrain was steep and loose in places, the kind of ground that demands your full attention or punishes you for looking away. She gave it exactly what it required, no more, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that speed and noise were the same thing, and she could not afford either. Inside her pack, beneath the intelligence equipment, beneath the communications gear, beneath the carefully arranged professional equipment of an intelligence officer doing her assigned job, was something else entirely. A Pelican case, custom foam lining, combination lock. The combination was her partner's birthday. The partner she had carried out of hostile territory 6 years ago, when command told her to leave him and complete the mission. The partner who was alive today because she had made a different choice. The partner whose birthday she put on the one piece of equipment that reminded her every single day of what she actually believed about the purpose of a warrior. She found the position in 4 minutes. It was a natural shelf of rock 240 meters above and to the southwest of the ambush site, partially concealed by an overhang and offering a sight line that covered 3 of the 7 enemy positions she had identified. Not perfect, not the position she would have chosen if she had the luxury of planning, but available. And in combat, available beats perfect every single time. She set the pack down, opened the combination lock, lifted the case out. Inside was a weapon that had not been listed on any manifest for this mission. A weapon that her current assignment profile gave no indication she knew how to use. A weapon that would have generated significant questions from the mission planners if anyone had examined her personal load carefully enough to notice it. A customized Barrett M82A1, chambered in .5D BMG, with a Schmidt and Bender scope that she had zeroed herself 3 days ago at a private range 40 miles from Coronado. She had told no one she was going. She had signed in under a civilian designation and spent 6 hours in the prone position until the rifle and her body were speaking the same language again. She assembled it with the practiced economy of a person who has done something so many times that their hands remember it independently of their mind. Each component seated correctly, verified by touch as much as sight, each connection checked twice and trusted once. She settled into position, and through the scope, the world became very different. The first thing you notice when you look through a quality optic from a superior position is that the enemy's confidence looks completely different. From ground level, the enemy positions had seemed formidable, hidden, well chosen. From above and to the side, with the scope pulling everything close, they looked exactly like what they were, occupied and exposed. She saw a man in a dark jacket directing 2 others with hand signals from behind a fallen tree. He had a radio in his left hand. He was giving orders. He was the coordinator, the brain of the current operation, the one voice that was keeping the other positions synchronized. She identified him in 11 seconds. She built her firing solution in 40. Wind from the northwest at approximately 7 miles per hour, gusting to perhaps 12 at the ridgeline. Temperature affecting air density. Target distance exactly 218 meters by her rangefinder. No significant elevation correction required from this position. She controlled her breathing. This was the part that separated trained shooters from everyone else. Not the mechanics, not the equipment. The ability to slow your entire physiology down in the middle of a chaotic, lethal environment and find the stillness inside it. To become, for just a moment, something quieter than the world around you. She found it. She always found it. Her finger rested against the trigger with exactly the pressure that her training had built into her over years, until it was no longer something she thought about, but something she simply knew. She took one more breath, let half of it out, and squeezed. The shot broke the air like a thunderclap, enormous, even by the standards of a firefight that was already loud, and the coordinator behind the fallen tree was no longer coordinating anything. Below, in the killing ground of the ambush, the effect was immediate and dramatic, even if nobody understood its cause yet. The enemy firing positions that had been so perfectly synchronized suddenly stuttered. One man hesitated, looking toward where his commander had been. Another pulled back slightly behind his cover. The rhythm that had been holding the SEAL team in place for the past several minutes, that steady, disciplined pressure wavered for just a moment. And in special operations, a moment is everything. Hayes noticed it first. He had been in enough firefights to recognize the difference between a pause and a break, and this was something between the two. Something had changed. Something external to his team had changed the dynamics of the fight, and he didn't know what it was yet, but the part of his brain that had survived 17 deployments told him to be ready to exploit it. "Team," he said quietly, "stay alert. Something's happening." Then the second shot came, and the third. They came from somewhere high and to the southwest from a direction nobody, neither the SEAL team nor the enemy, had anticipated. And each one was followed by an immediate, incomplete silence from one of the enemy positions that had been so effectively containing the American operators. Webb was the first to say it out loud. "Someone's shooting from the ridge," he paused. "Someone's shooting them from the ridge." "Whose shooter?" Rodriguez demanded. "We don't have anyone on that ridge." Hayes raised his optic toward the southwest and scanned the ridgeline. He saw nothing. No movement, no muzzle flash, just the natural terrain of rock and brush and early morning light. But another enemy position went silent, and then another. And Hayes, who had spent his adult life understanding the professional application of violence, recognized what he was watching. Not luck, not a random factor. This was someone methodically dismantling the enemy's command structure from a position none of them had anticipated. This was someone who understood the battlefield well enough to find the one angle that changed everything. He thought about who he had brought on this mission. And the thought that arrived was so unexpected that he nearly said it out loud before he caught himself. He keyed his radio instead. "Carter. Carter, respond." Nothing. "Carter, what is your position?" Silence or on. The shooting from the southwest continued, measured, patient, surgical. Not the frantic volume of someone trying to suppress. The deliberate, precisely spaced fire of someone who had a target acquired it, eliminated it, and moved to the next one. Webb had repositioned behind a different rock and was now watching the enemy positions through his rifle scope. He saw what was happening before he could fully process what it meant. "They're not returning fire toward the southwest," he said. "They don't know where he is. They can't find the shooter." Hayes said quietly. Webb looked up from his scope. Hayes was still looking at the ridge. His jaw was tight. "Carter," he said one more time into the radio. "If that's you, respond." And from a distance, through 240 meters of mountain air, a voice came back on the radio. Steady, unhurried, already moving to the next calculation. "I'm a little busy right now, Commander." The silence that followed on the team's radio net lasted exactly 3 seconds. It was Webb who broke it, and the way he said it, the tone in his voice was something none of the men who heard it would ever forget. Not because of what the words were, but because of what they meant coming from him specifically. Coming from the man who had made the comment about the clipboard. He said, "Is that Carter?" And Hayes said, "That's not a support asset." And Rodriguez, who had said the least of anyone on this mission, said the thing that became the quiet truth of the whole day. That he said is a sniper. She moved between shots. That was the discipline most people didn't understand about precision shooting at this level. It wasn't about finding one position and firing from it until the situation resolved. It was about constant assessment. After each shot you evaluated. Did they locate me? Are they adjusting toward my position? Is this angle still valid, or has the situation changed enough that I need to change with it? She moved. Not far, not chaotically. Deliberate 5 to 10 meter repositions that changed her angle just enough to prevent anyone below from triangulating her position with confidence. Each move cost her time. Each move was necessary. The enemy was trying to find her. She could see 2 men on the eastern slope scanning the ridge she was operating from. They were good. They were patient. But they were looking for muzzle flash, and she had positioned herself behind the natural overhang, specifically to dissipate the visual signature of each shot before it cleared the rock. They could hear her. They could not see her. She assessed the remaining positions. 4 active, 3 eliminated, 2 in reserve on the eastern slope that she had predicted from the beginning, but had not engaged yet because they were the hardest geometry from her current position. She shifted, 20 meters to the north along the shelf. The angle changed. The eastern slope came into better view through the scope. She could see one of the reserve positions now. One man behind a natural rock formation positioned to respond to an attempted breakout by the SEAL team to the south. Still disciplined, still waiting, still operating on a plan that was no longer coherent because the coordinator who had built that plan was no longer in the fight. She built the firing solution. Below, she heard Hayes's voice on the radio. He had begun moving his team, carefully, exploiting the gaps her work was opening in the enemy's containment. Two operators shifting position while two others provided cover. Textbook. Controlled. Hayes was a real professional, she thought. He was adapting in real time with incomplete information, which was the actual definition of what special operations required. She fired. The reserve position on the eastern slope went quiet. 8 down. 2 remaining, both now pulling back from their original positions. They understood something had fundamentally changed. The controlled coordination of the ambush had collapsed. They were operating alone now without communication with the rest of their element, without orders, without the confidence of the plan they had rehearsed. Fear was doing what bullets couldn't do efficiently. It was making them make decisions. And people making decisions under fear alone without a plan make mistakes. She waited, because patience was the last weapon she needed. 60 seconds. One of the 2 remaining men moved, exactly the direction she expected. The movement of someone trying to reach better cover rather than trying to fight, which told her everything about his current mental state. He was trying to survive, not win. The transition from attacking to surviving is the moment when a fight changes irrevocably, and she had been waiting for it. She fired. 9 down. The last man was running. She tracked him through the scope, running east along the slope away from the American position, away from the killing ground, running with the animal urgency of someone who has suddenly understood that they are not the hunter they believe themselves to be. She made a decision in half a second, the same kind of decision that had defined her career 6 years ago. She let him run, not because she couldn't, not because the shot was beyond her capability, because a man running away from the fight was no longer a threat to the 8 people she had come here to protect. And the line between necessary and unnecessary was one she had drawn for herself a long time ago and had never once crossed. She lowered the rifle and checked the time. 18 minutes. She descended the ridgeline with the rifle broken down and secured in the case back in the pack on her shoulders, moving carefully down the loose terrain toward the sounds of her team. Her team. She noticed she had thought of it that way without deciding to. 8 people she had not known 24 hours ago were her team. That was just who she was. Hayes saw her before she reached the perimeter. He was standing slightly apart from the rest of his men, and his expression was a thing she recognized from other commanders in other places. It was the expression of a man recalculating, not just the tactical situation. Something larger than that. He watched her approach. She stopped 3 meters from him and set the pack down and looked at him with the same steady calm she had worn since the helicopter. He said, "Who are you?" She had been asked that question before in different places, after different operations, by different commanders who had made different assumptions about what she was and discovered they had been working with an incomplete picture. She always answered the same way: someone assigned to help your team survive. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the pack, then back at her face, and she saw the specific moment when the full picture assembled itself behind his eyes. Not just what she had done today, but what it implied about everything that had come before it. Every deployment, every assignment, every moment she had walked into a room and been assessed and categorized and set aside. All of it, he said quietly. The terrain analysis, the communication pattern, the positions. Yes, you knew before we landed. I suspected, I confirmed during the movement. He was quiet for a moment. Around them, his operators were tending to their equipment, checking on each other, doing the necessary work of a team that had just survived something that should have gone differently. Rodriguez was looking at her. Kowalski was looking at her. Even Webb was looking at her, and his face had the particular quality of a man who had something to say and didn't yet know how to say it. Hayes asked the last question. "Why did you let the last one run?" She picked up her pack. "Because he was running," she said. Hayes nodded once, slowly, the kind of nod that means something is being filed away permanently, and the team began to move toward extraction. Behind her, she heard Webb's voice, quiet and without the edge it had carried since the helicopter. Someone's going to want to talk to her when we get back. And Rodriguez, equally quiet. Yeah, a pause. I think a lot of someone's. The extraction took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of moving through terrain that felt different now than it had on the way in, not because the ground had changed, because the people moving through it had changed. Hayes kept the formation tight and the pace aggressive, the way you move when you want to be somewhere else, before whoever sent those fighters figures out what happened to them. Nobody spoke beyond what the mission required: short transmissions, confirmations, course corrections. The professional silence of people managing something large and unresolved while keeping their hands busy with the work of surviving. Olivia walked in the same position she had walked in on the way to the objective. Middle of the formation, same pack on her back, same steady pace. From the outside, nothing about her looked different, but the formation around her was different. Not dramatically, not in any way that would show up in an after-action report, but the operators who had spent the inbound movement ignoring her were now aware of her in a completely different way. Rodriguez, covering the left flank, kept his spacing consistent, but his angle had shifted slightly, orienting him more toward her position than it had been before. Kowalski, behind her, maintained exactly 3 meters of distance without being told, which was the correct tactical spacing for protecting a priority element. Nobody had ordered these adjustments. They had happened on their own. Webb was on point 15 meters ahead of Hayes, moving through the brush with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He hadn't looked back at her since they started moving. But twice in 40 minutes, and moments when the terrain got difficult and the footing was uncertain, he had slowed his pace by exactly the amount it took for the formation to close up slightly to keep everyone together, to make sure nobody fell behind. He would never have admitted that he was doing it for her specifically. She knew he was. She said nothing. The helicopter was waiting in the clearing, rotors turning at idle, the crew chief scanning the tree line with the focused expression of someone who has been told there's been contact and is very interested in what emerges from the forest. When Hayes came out of the trees and gave the all-clear signal, the crew chief visibly relaxed by about 4%, which in helicopter crew chief terms was essentially a celebration. Olivia was the 5th person to board. She found her seat, secured her pack, and looked out the window at the mountain as the Black Hawk lifted. She was already thinking about the debrief, and specifically about the questions that were going to be asked in it. The flight back was 47 minutes. Hayes sat across from her again, same position as before, but this time he wasn't looking at his tablet. He was looking at her, not with hostility, not with the carefully neutral non-expression of a superior officer managing his assumptions about a subordinate. He was looking at her with the direct, evaluating attention of a man who had discovered that his mental model of a situation was significantly wrong and was actively working to rebuild it on more accurate foundations. She met his gaze once. He didn't look away. She did, not because she was uncomfortable, because there were things she needed to think through before she talked to anyone and sustained eye contact with a Navy SEAL commander who had just watched her do something he had no framework for, was not conducive to clear thinking. At minute 31 of the flight, Hayes leaned forward slightly. He had to raise his voice over the rotor noise, but just barely keeping it within the bubble of their 2 seats. How long have you been shooting at that level? She considered the question, not the answer which she knew. The question, what he was actually asking. How long have I been capable of what you saw today? Or how long have I been assigned to roles that don't reflect it? He absorbed that. Both. 12 years to the first question, she said. 6 years to the second. He was quiet for a moment. The helicopter banked slightly and the mountain disappeared from the window. 6 years, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. Yes. And in those 6 years, how many operations like today? She looked at him directly now. None like today, but situations where the analysis I was doing and the skills I wasn't authorized to apply were directly connected to outcomes, more than I'm comfortable counting. Hayes sat back. His jaw worked slightly. It was the only external sign that something was happening behind the controlled exterior of his face, but she had been reading people in high-stakes environments for 12 years, and she could see it clearly. He was angry, not at her. She recognized that specifically. She had seen anger directed at her enough times to know the difference between a man who was angry with her and a man who was angry on her behalf. This was the second kind. It was rarer, and it felt more complicated, and she didn't entirely know what to do with it, so she turned back to the window. Neither of them spoke again for the rest of the flight. But when the helicopter touched down and the crew chief slid the door open and the team began moving toward the debriefing facility, Hayes stepped off last, and as he passed her, he said quietly enough that only she could hear, "This isn't finished." She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because she knew he was right. The debrief started at 0730 hours in a windowless conference room inside the Special Operations compound at Coronado. The kind of room that exists in every military installation in the world and looks identical in all of them. Institutional table, uncomfortable chairs, whiteboards with dry erase markers that are always running out of ink and overhead lighting that makes everyone look slightly worse than they feel. A naval intelligence officer named Commander Patricia Walsh ran the session. She was 52 years old, had been doing this for 24 years, and had the particular skill of asking questions that sounded straightforward until you were 3 sentences into answering them and realized they were not straightforward at all. Walsh had read the preliminary contact report on the flight from Washington. She had 47 questions prepared. She had expected to spend the first 40 minutes of the debrief working through the team's account of the ambush and the successful extraction. She did not expect the first thing Hayes said when she asked for an overview of the operation to be, "Before I give you anything, I need to know what clearance you have for Captain Carter's full service record." The room changed temperature by about 5 degrees. Walsh looked at Hayes, then at Olivia, who was sitting 3 seats to his left with her hands folded on the table and her expression completely neutral. Then back at Hayes. "Captain Carter's record is an intelligence support matter. This debrief is focused on the tactical." "Commander Walsh," Hayes said, and his voice carried the particular quality of a man who is not going to be redirected in the past 18 months. "What is the highest confirmed distance engagement recorded by an operator assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command?" Walsh paused. "That information is classified at a level that 740 meters, Hayes said. "Daytime, moving target, adverse weather conditions, documented in an after-action report filed under a code designation I am not going to say in this room." He stopped. "Let that sit for a second. I have reasons to believe that Captain Carter could improve on that number. And I am asking you politely before this debrief proceeds any further, to explain to me why an asset of that capability has been assigned to carry a tablet for the past 6 years." The silence in the room lasted 4 seconds. Olivia did not look at Hayes. She stared at the center of the table and felt something that she was not going to name, because naming it would mean acknowledging how long she had been waiting for someone to ask that question. And if she acknowledged that she was going to feel things that were not appropriate to feel in a room full of people who were watching her very carefully. Walsh set down her pen. She looked at Olivia. "Captain Carter, would you like to address Commander Hayes's question?" "No," Olivia said. Walsh raised an eyebrow. "Not because I disagree with anything he said," Olivia continued, "but because the answer to his question isn't something that belongs in this debrief. It belongs in a separate conversation with the appropriate personnel. And if Commander Walsh has the clearance to access my complete service record, she already knows the answer. And if she doesn't, then this isn't the room where we discuss it." Walsh studied her for a long moment. The kind of study that is doing a lot of things at once, assessing, calculating, deciding. Then she picked her pen back up. "Understood. We'll proceed with the tactical debrief. But Captain Carter, I will be scheduling a separate review." A pause. A full one, and the debrief continued. But something in the room had irrevocably shifted. Because everyone present, Hayes, Walsh, the 5 other operators sitting around that table now, understood that they were in the presence of a file that was significantly more complicated than anyone had briefed them to expect. And in special operations, a file that complicated means a story that is significantly more interesting than the one you've been told. Webb leaned back in his chair during the tactical review portion and looked at the ceiling for a moment when they got to his attempted reposition and the enemy fire that had denied it. "I thought I was going to eat it," he said flatly. "I was completely boxed in. I had 0 angles." He paused. Then Carter got on the radio and started telling us where they all were. "Walk me through that specifically," Walsh said, pen ready. "She wasn't in a fighting position," Webb said. She was in a depression behind the rock formation. She had gone completely still, and she was reading it, reading the whole thing like it was a diagram someone had drawn for her. He stopped again, seemed to be working through how to describe something that was still landing fully in his mind. I've worked with good intelligence officers. I've worked with exceptional intelligence officers. None of them have ever made me feel like I was operating with incomplete information about my own position. She did, in the first 4 minutes of contact. Rodriguez said nothing, which for Rodriguez meant he agreed completely. Kowalski said, "When she disappeared, I thought she was moving back toward the equipment cache. I thought—" He stopped, clearly reconsidering whether to finish the thought. "Go ahead," Walsh said. "I thought she was moving away from the contact." He said it with the specific discomfort of someone admitting something true that they're not proud of. "I thought she was pulling back, getting to safety." And then he looked at the table, and then she started shooting from 240 meters up a ridgeline that I had looked at directly and dismissed as inaccessible in the time we had. And I started thinking about what it takes to look at a ridgeline and know it's accessible when everyone else has already decided it isn't. He paused. "That's not something you learn. That's something you are built from." Hayes had been listening without speaking. Now he said she let one run. The room focused on him. Last target, he was retreating east. She had the angle. She had the shot. He looked at Walsh. She didn't take it. Walsh looked at Olivia. Olivia said, "He was no longer a threat. Tactically a retreating combatant with knowledge of your team's position." "Was running," Olivia said. "And I don't shoot people who are running away from the fight. I shoot people who are threatening the people I'm protecting." The moment he turned east, he was neither. Walsh wrote something down. Hayes watched Olivia write it down. Then he said, "I want that noted as sound tactical judgment, not an emotional one." She had already eliminated every active threat. The retreating element posed a significantly lower risk than the time and attention required to engage him, given that we were moving toward extraction and she needed to get back to the team's position. Walsh looked up. "Noted, Commander." Olivia finally looked at Hayes, just briefly. Just the kind of look that carries acknowledgement without any of the words that would make acknowledgement visible. He gave her the same look back, and she understood in that moment that the 6 years she had spent being the person nobody wanted to talk about were not necessarily what the next 6 years were going to look like. The formal debrief concluded at 11:30 hours. Walsh dismissed the operators and asked Olivia to remain. The two women sat across from each other in the empty room for a moment before Walsh spoke. And when she did, her voice had lost the formal procedural quality it had carried throughout the session. Not unprofessional, just different, more direct. "Your full file," Walsh said. "I have the clearance. I pulled it at 0600 this morning when the preliminary contact report came through." Olivia waited. "I have some questions that aren't in any debrief protocol," Walsh said, "and I want to ask them directly without a recorder running." "All right," Olivia said. Walsh looked at her across the institutional table with the overhead lights, making both of them look slightly worse than they felt, and she asked the question that all the other questions were built around. "Why did you stay in the assignment?" Olivia considered the question with the same care she gave every question that mattered. "Because the assignment needed to be done," she said finally. "The intelligence work is real. The analysis supports real operations. People don't die less because the person reading the intercepts is also qualified to do something else." "That's an answer," Walsh said. "It's not the whole answer." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "After what happened 6 years ago," she said, "there were people in this building who believed I had made a fundamental error in judgment, who believed that the decision I made to extract my partner instead of completing the primary objective demonstrated a flaw in how I operated under pressure. And you disagree." "I disagree that it was a flaw. I don't disagree that it was a choice." She paused. "I made a choice. I knew what it cost. And I accepted that the people who saw it as a failure were going to have influence over where I was assigned next. I didn't fight it because fighting it would have required me to argue that my partner's life was less important than the mission. And I am never going to make that argument." Walsh set her pen down again. "So you accepted a lateral reassignment to an intelligence role." "I accepted it, and spent 6 years being enormously overqualified for the work you were doing." "I spent 6 years doing work that mattered," Olivia said carefully. Some of it happened to require skills I had developed over the previous decade. Some of it happened to be significantly below the ceiling of what I was capable of. Both things were true simultaneously, and I managed to live with that. Walsh looked at her for a long time. Then she said something that Olivia did not expect coming from a woman who had spent 24 years navigating the specific institutional culture of naval intelligence with its particular combination of brilliance and rigidity. I should have pulled your file 2 years ago, Walsh said. That's on me. Olivia looked at her. Not because of today, Walsh continued, because of the work you've been doing in the intelligence role. There are 3 instances in the last 18 months where your analysis directly altered mission parameters in ways that prevented significant casualties. I know this because I read the downstream reports. The analysis wasn't attributed to you by name. It went through the standard processing chain, but the methodology is identifiable if you know what you're looking at. She paused. I should have known what I was looking at sooner. The silence between them lasted a few seconds. What happens now? Olivia asked. Walsh up her pen. I'm going to write a recommendation, she said, and I'm going to ask Commander Hayes to co-sign it. And then I'm going to submit it through channels that move faster than the channels your last assignment went through. A pause. I can't promise the outcome. I can promise the effort. Olivia nodded. One more question, Walsh said. The Barrett. Where did you get it, and how did you get it onto a mission manifest without triggering a flagged review? And for the first time in the entire conversation, something that was almost a smile moved across Olivia Carter's face. I carried it as personal equipment, she said. Technically, intelligence officers assigned to field support roles are permitted to carry personal defensive equipment at their own discretion provided it doesn't exceed specified weight limits. She paused. The Barrett M82A1 field disassembled and distributed across a modified pack frame comes in at approximately 2 pounds under the specified maximum. Walsh stared at her. I checked, Olivia said, 3 times. Walsh made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same general neighborhood. It was the first purely human sound either of them had made in the room, and it loosened something in the air between them that had been very tightly wound since 0730 hours. They were not friends, they were professionals who had just discovered a significant amount of mutual respect through a very unusual set of circumstances. But that was in Olivia Carter's experience often where the most durable professional relationships began. All right, Walsh said, capping her pen. Go get some rest. You've had a long morning. Olivia stood and picked up her pack. At the door she stopped because something had been sitting at the edge of her mind since the debrief began, and she needed to say it while the room was empty and the recorder was off and it was just 2 women talking. Commander Walsh. Walsh looked up. The cell we went in to surveil. We got imagery and signals data before the ambush. Partial but usable. She paused. The infrastructure targets they were planning the communication network specifically. There's a pattern in the intercepts I identified during the operation that the standard analysis chain is going to miss unless someone is looking for it. She set the pack down and pulled out a small notebook. She opened it to a page of neat, precise notations and set it on the table. I wrote it down on the way back. Walsh looked at the notebook. The attack they were planning wasn't the primary event, Olivia said. It was a rehearsal. There's a second network, larger, more sophisticated, and based on the communication patterns I intercepted, they are significantly further along in their planning than anyone currently believes. Walsh picked up the notebook. Read for 30 seconds. Her expression changed in a way that told Olivia she was reading something that was landing in the correct place. How confident are you? Confident enough to write it down on the helicopter and not throw it away, Olivia said. Walsh looked up. 80%, 90. In the pattern 92, in my interpretation of what the pattern means 78, there's a variable I can't account for without additional signals data. I'll get you the additional signals data, Walsh said immediately. Not a consideration, a decision, the kind that comes fast from people who know how to recognize the moment when something important is sitting right in front of them. All right, Olivia said. She picked up her pack and walked out of the room. In the hallway, she stopped for a moment and let herself stand still. Just for a second, not long enough for anyone passing to notice. The corridor was fluorescent lit and busy with the morning traffic of a working special operations installation. People moving between briefings, carrying gear, having the kind of focused, half conversations that constitute most of military life. Nobody looked at her. That was fine. It had always been fine. She started walking toward the transit quarters, where she had a room and a bed, in approximately 6 hours before the situation she had just created. In that debrief room, began generating consequences she would need to be rested to manage. Because Walsh was going to make calls, Hayes was going to make calls, and somewhere at the end of those calls was a conversation that Olivia had been waiting for in one form or another for 6 years. She was 3 hallways from the transit quarters when she heard footsteps behind her that were moving faster than ambient hallway traffic. She didn't turn around. She knew the footsteps. Webb came up beside her and matched her pace, which required him to slow down slightly. He walked with her for a full 10 seconds without speaking, which for a man who generally had something to say, was an unusually long silence. She let it exist. She had learned that silences that needed to be filled were usually filled with the wrong things, and silences that were allowed to breathe usually produced something worth hearing. Finally, he said, "I want to say something." "All right," she said. "In the helicopter, on the way out." He paused. "I said something about a clipboard." "I heard it." Another pause. "I know you heard it." She kept walking. "I've worked with a lot of people," he said, "a lot of different kinds of people. And I think I am decent at reading them fast. It's the job. You need to know who you're working with before the shooting starts." He paused. "I read you wrong." She said nothing. "I don't read people wrong very often," he said. "When I do, I like to understand why, so I don't do it again." He was quiet for a moment. "Will you tell me something?" "Depends on what you ask." "Why didn't you say anything on the inbound movement? You knew something was wrong. You knew before any of us. You could have said something earlier, pushed harder, made us listen. Why didn't you?" She stopped walking. He stopped with her. She looked at him directly, the way she rarely let herself look at people who were still in the process of deciding what they thought about her. "Because I did say something. I said it on the radio when it mattered most. And you all heard it and responded to it and used it." She paused. "Before the contact, anything I said would have been filtered through your assumption of what I was. After the contact established that the situation was exactly what I said it was, you were listening differently. So I chose the moment carefully, and it worked." Webb looked at her for a long moment. "That's a cold calculation," he said finally. "No," she said. "It's an accurate one. There's a difference." He seemed to chew on that. Then he said something she genuinely did not expect. "Rodriguez wants to know if you'll do a range session with the team before your next assignment or whatever Walsh sets up." He didn't say it like a request to Wagwing. He said it more like he needs to see it with his own eyes to believe it was real. She thought about that for a moment. "Tell Rodriguez I'll consider it." That's a yes in Olivia Carter language. She started walking again. That's a "I'll consider it" in Olivia Carter language. He fell into step beside her for another 3 seconds, then peeled off toward the operations wing. "Hey, Carter?" She didn't stop. "Webb." 18 minutes, he said. "I've been in this job for 8 years. I have never seen anyone do what you did in 18 minutes. Not once. A beat. That matters. I want you to know it matters." She kept walking. But something in her chest shifted by exactly the amount she would allow it to in the hallway of a military installation in the middle of a morning that had started before the sun came up and had become, without her planning for it, the kind of morning that divided the before from the after. She reached the transit quarters, unlocked the door, set the pack on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed and put her hands on her knees and looked at the wall. 12 hours ago, she had been nobody's priority. She had been the asset they had to bring because the mission profile required analysis support. She had been the woman with the clipboard and the kit bag. She had been the intelligence officer who was going to stay out of the way while the real operators did the work. 12 hours later, Walsh was making calls. Hayes was co-signing a recommendation. Rodriguez wanted a range session. And Webb, who had made the comment about the clipboard with the careless confidence of a man who had never been wrong about a first impression, had walked down 3 hallways to say something that most people in his position would have found a reason not to say. She did not let herself feel too much of any of it, because she had been here before. Not exactly here, not this specific configuration of events, but in the general territory of a moment where things appeared to be changing. And she had learned through the specific education of having those moments not always become what they appeared to be, to hold them carefully, but something was different this time. She could feel it in the specifics. Walsh's immediate decision to get her additional signals data. Hayes's deliberate, unprompted defense of her tactical judgment in front of a recording debrief. The notebook on Walsh's desk with 32 lines of analysis that represented something larger than one interrupted reconnaissance mission. Because the second network she had described was real. She was 92% confident in the pattern and 78% confident in her interpretation of it, which meant there was a 22% margin where she could be reading the evidence incorrectly. She respected that margin. She always respected that margin. The analysts who got people killed were the ones who stopped respecting their uncertainty. But the evidence she had assembled from the intercepts during the operation, combined with the signals data she had been processing for the 3 weeks prior to the mission, pointed to something that was significantly larger than a single cell in the mountains of Northern California. It pointed to a network, sophisticated, compartmentalized, and moving toward a timeline. And the only reason she had been in the position to assemble that evidence today was that 6 months ago, someone had decided that the intelligence support role for SEAL reconnaissance operations in the Pacific region should be filled by Captain Olivia Carter, intelligence officer, former precision shooter carrier of a Barrett M82A1 under the specified personal equipment weight limit. She thought about that specific chain of contingencies and what it would have meant if any one of them had been different, if she had been assigned elsewhere, if the mission had gone as planned and they had extracted clean without contact. If she had decided in the moment when everything changed and the team was pinned down in the mountain valley to stay in her depression behind the rock formation and continue radioing position data and wait for someone with a rifle to do what she was capable of doing faster and better than anyone else currently available. She had not stayed, she never stayed. Not because she was reckless, because she understood at a level that went below training into something more fundamental, that the purpose of preparation was the moment when preparation was needed. And if you had prepared your whole life to be useful in a specific kind of moment and then declined to be useful when that moment arrived because your paperwork said you were something else, then you had not prepared for the moment at all. You had prepared for the paperwork. And Olivia Carter had never in her entire life prepared for the paperwork. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. In the operations wing, Walsh was on the phone. In the tactical planning room, Hayes was writing a memo. In the team bay, Rodriguez was telling Kowalski something quietly about a ridgeline and a rifle in 18 minutes. And Webb was sitting at his desk with his hands flat on the surface in front of him, staring at nothing, doing the specific kind of thinking that happens when a man who is very good at reading people confronts the evidence that he has missed something significant and needs to understand how and why, so he doesn't miss it again. He was thinking about what she had said in the hallway, about choosing the moment carefully, about the difference between an accurate calculation and a cold one. I thought about it for a long time, and then he thought about the clipboard comment and the specific confidence with which he had made it, and the 8 years of experience behind him that had told him he knew what he was looking at when she walked onto that helicopter. And he thought I was looking at exactly what she needed me to see, which meant she had been managing this from the beginning, not manipulating, not deceiving, but operating with a clear understanding of how she was being perceived and a precise strategy for when and how that perception was going to change. He sat with that for a while. Then he picked up his phone and sent Rodriguez a message. She said she'd consider the range session. Rodriguez replied in 4 seconds. That's a yes. Webb put the phone down. And for the first time since Aero 200 hours, when he had made a comment about a clipboard in a helicopter on the way to a mountain that was going to change the way he understood a certain kind of person, he smiled. She slept for 4 hours and 20 minutes. Not because that was enough. Because at 15:47 hours, her phone rang with a number she recognized as Walsh's direct line. And when Commander Patricia Walsh called your direct line 4 hours after telling you to get some rest, you did not let it go to voicemail. She picked up on the second ring. Carter. I need you in conference room B in 20 minutes, Walsh said. Her voice had a different quality than it had carried in the debrief room that morning. Tighter, more compressed. The voice of someone who has looked at something and found it significantly larger than expected. Bring the notebook. The line went dead. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stood, washed her face with cold water, put her uniform back on with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been dressing in a hurry for most of her adult life, and picked up the notebook from the inside pocket of her kit bag, where she had placed it after Walsh handed it back to her at the end of the morning session. She was in conference room B in 17 minutes. Walsh was already there. But she was not alone. There were two other people at the table. One was a man Olivia had never seen in person, but recognized immediately from the briefing photographs she had studied as part of her intelligence work. Rear Admiral James Calloway, Director of Special Operations Intelligence Coordination for the Pacific Region. 61 years old, decorated career. The kind of man whose presence in a room at 1600 hours on the same day as a field operation meant that what had started as a tactical incident had become something else entirely. The other person was a civilian. Mid-40s, dark suit, the specific kind of anonymous that is very carefully constructed. No insignia, no identification visible. The kind of presence that didn't need any of those things to communicate clearly that they were important in a way that outranked insignia. Olivia stopped in the doorway for exactly 1 second. Then she walked in and sat down. Walsh said, "Thank you for coming quickly, Admiral Calloway. This is Captain Olivia Carter, the officer I briefed you on this afternoon." Calloway looked at her with the direct, calibrating attention of a man who had spent 40 years assessing people quickly and accurately. "Captain Carter," he said, "I've been reading your file for the past 3 hours." "I see," she said. "I have some questions about the second network." "All right, starting with how you identified it." She set the notebook on the table and opened it to the first page of notations. "The cell we went in to surveil was communicating on a frequency rotation that follows a pattern I've seen documented in 3 previous intelligence packages from unrelated theaters." She paused. "Unrelated geographically, but the communication architecture is identical. The same encryption approach, the same timing intervals, the same method for embedding secondary signals within primary transmissions." She looked at Calloway directly. "That methodology doesn't develop independently in 3 separate geographic contexts. It gets taught, which means there's a single source training multiple cells in operational security at a level that is significantly above what we typically see in domestic threat networks." The civilian leaned forward slightly. Calloway said, "And you identified this from intercepts gathered during the operation itself." "During the operation and in the 3 weeks prior," she said. "The pre-mission signals work I was assigned produced data that I processed through the standard analysis chain. What the standard chain flagged and what I noticed when I looked at the raw data were 2 different things." "Explain that," the civilian said. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was unremarkable, which she suspected was very deliberate. "The standard analysis chain is optimized to identify known threat signatures," she said. "It finds what it's been told to look for. What I noticed in the raw data was a negative space, a pattern of what wasn't being transmitted and when, and in correlation with what external events. The standard chain doesn't look for negative space because negative space can't be defined as a specific signature." She paused. "But a person who has spent enough time reading communications from sophisticated networks learns to notice when something is being deliberately not said." The civilian sat back. He did not look at Calloway. He was looking at Olivia with the expression of someone who has been told a room contains something valuable and has just found it. "How many people in your current chain are capable of that analysis?" Calloway asked. She thought about it honestly. "In the Pacific region, 2 that I know of with certainty, possibly a third who has the instincts, but not yet the experience to trust them." Calloway looked at Walsh. Walsh said nothing. She was watching Olivia with the expression of a woman who had asked herself a question 3 hours ago and was now watching the answer prove itself out in real time. "Captain Carter," Calloway said, "I want to talk to you about your service record." And there it was. The conversation she had been waiting for in one form or another for 6 years. She had imagined it sometimes in the specific way you imagine things you want very much, but have trained yourself not to expect quietly, carefully in the margins of other thoughts, never quite letting it take up the space it wanted to occupy. She had imagined it going a number of different ways. She had not quite imagined it going like this. "All right," she said. 6 years ago," Calloway said, "operation that I am not going to name in this room. You were operating as a precision shooter attached to a special operations element. Your primary objective was—" "I know what the primary objective was," she said quietly. He stopped. "I said, I lived it. If you're asking me to walk through it for the record, I will. But if you're asking me whether I regret the decision I made, the answer is no. And if you're asking me whether I would make the same decision again, the answer is yes. The room was very quiet. The civilian was watching her with an intensity that had nothing to do with hostility and everything to do with the kind of concentrated attention that high-stakes decisions require. Calloway said, "I'm not asking either of those questions." She looked at him. "I'm asking," he said, "who made the determination that what you did constituted a judgment failure sufficient to warrant a reassignment?" She processed that, the question itself, the framing of it, the implication behind it. "That determination was made by the mission commander at the time," she said carefully, "and was upheld through the standard review process." "I've read the review," Calloway said. "I read it this afternoon for the first time, which is something that should have happened significantly sooner, and I will be addressing that separately." He paused. "Captain Carter, the determination that was entered into your record framed your decision as a failure to prioritize mission objectives over personal attachment." "Yes," she said. "Do you agree with that framing?" She was quiet for a moment, not because she was uncertain, because she was choosing the precise words that were true and could not be argued with on either the professional or the personal level simultaneously. "I prioritize the survival of my teammate over the completion of a mission objective," she said. "I made that choice with full awareness of its watchdogs. Whether that constitutes a failure or prioritization depends entirely on how you define what the mission is." She paused. "If the mission is the objective, then I failed. If the mission is the people carrying out the objective, then I made the correct call." Calloway looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the civilian. The civilian nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Calloway said, "The operator you extracted, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Holt." She kept her face completely still. It was not a name she expected to hear in this room in this context at this moment. She had not heard it spoken in a professional setting in over 4 years. "Yes," she said. "Chief Petty Officer Holt is currently assigned to a classified program that I am not going to describe in this room," Calloway said. "What I will tell you is that his contributions to that program over the past 3 years have had a direct and measurable impact on national security in a way that would not have occurred if he had died in a mountain on a night 6 years ago." He let that settle. "I want you to understand that I am saying that not as a justification of your decision. You couldn't have known that when you made the choice. I'm saying it because I think you've been carrying the weight of a judgment that was entered into your record as a failure, and I want the record corrected." She did not allow herself to respond to that immediately, because if she responded to it immediately, she was going to respond to it with something other than words, and this was not the room for that. She breathed, counted 3 seconds, found the steadiness that she had been finding inside herself since she was 22 years old, and the world kept presenting her with situations that required it. "Thank you," she said. "It was the simplest true thing available." Calloway nodded. "We are going to talk about what comes next," he said. "But before we do, I need to understand something about today. The ridge position you took. 240 meters above the contact zone on terrain, you assessed in real time as accessible, while every other operator on the ground had dismissed it." He leaned forward slightly. "Walk me through the decision." She walked him through it. Precisely, sequentially. The observation during the whole position on the inbound movement that something was wrong with the terrain read. The way she had cataloged the ridgeline mentally as a contingency while simultaneously processing the intelligence data that was her assigned function. The moment contact was established and she performed the immediate calculus, what the team had, what the team needed, what she was capable of providing, and whether the geometry of the situation made that provision possible. "You were carrying the Barrett on every field assignment?" the civilian asked. "For the past 14 months, she said, "since I was assigned to Pacific Region Field Support. And before that, the same personal equipment authorization applies across all intelligence field support assignments. I've carried it since I transitioned to the intelligence role." The civilian looked at Walsh. Walsh looked at the table. She was clearly doing the math on how many field assignments Olivia had accompanied in the past 6 years, and what the personal equipment manifest for all of them looked like, and what the fact that this had never once been questioned said about the assumptions that had shaped those reviews. "You were prepared," Calloway said. "Yes," she said simply. For a situation that your assignment profile gave no indication you would ever need to respond to. My assignment profile, she said, described what I was assigned to do, not what I was capable of doing. I have never confused those two things. A pause. Someone did, several someones over a period of years. That's a different problem. The room was quiet again. Then the civilian said something that changed the temperature of the entire conversation. Captain Carter, what do you know about Project Meridian? She looked at him. I know that name appears in communications patterns associated with the second network, she said slowly. I know it appears specifically in the negative space I described as something that is being deliberately not mentioned in transmissions that would logically reference it if it existed in the context being discussed. And I know that the fact that it isn't mentioned in those specific contexts suggests that the people communicating are operating under extremely disciplined information compartmentalization. She paused, which suggests they've been trained by someone who understands how signals intelligence works at an operational level. The civilian's expression did not change, but something in the room did. Calloway said, "How long have you been tracking that reference?" 11 days, she said. It appears in 6 separate intercepts across 3 different frequency bands. It is never the subject of the communication. It is always peripheral, always in a context that would not flag it to a standard pattern analysis. If you weren't specifically looking for what wasn't being said, you would process every one of those intercepts and come away with useful tactical information and no awareness that something larger was being carefully kept out of the conversation. She reached forward and turned to a specific page in the notebook, pushed it toward Calloway. He looked at it, pushed it toward the civilian who looked at it for considerably longer. You wrote this on the helicopter, Walsh said. I started it on the helicopter, Olivia said. I finished it while you were on the phone. The civilian set the notebook down. Captain Carter, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. All right. Is Project Meridian a domestic threat, a foreign-directed operation, or something that doesn't fit cleanly into either category? She looked at him steadily. Based on what I currently have, option 3, the communication architecture has characteristics consistent with foreign training or foreign direction at the operational design level. But the personnel indicated by the pattern analysis are domestic. The targets are domestic. And the operational timeline, she paused, is not as extended as a purely foreign-directed campaign would typically maintain, which means either the operation has been accelerating or the domestic element has achieved a level of operational independence that the foreign connection no longer needs to actively manage. The civilian looked at Calloway. Calloway looked at Walsh. Walsh looked at Olivia with the expression of a woman who had understood at 0600 hours this morning that she was in the presence of something significant and was now watching that assessment prove conservative. Calloway stood. We need 30 minutes, he said to Walsh. Can you make sure Captain Carter has what she needs? I need access to the raw signals archive for the past 6 weeks, Olivia said. Everyone looked at her. If what I think is happening, there will be additional Meridian references in intercepts that were processed and filed without the pattern being flagged. I need to go back through the raw data, not the processed summaries. The summaries have already lost the negative space. She paused. Give me 6 hours and the archive access and I will give you a complete picture, or as complete as the current data allows. Calloway looked at the civilian. The civilian said, give her the access. It was 1638 hours. By 1645, she was in a secure analysis room with 3 monitors, an encrypted archive connection, and a cup of coffee that someone had left on the desk, still warm, that she was reasonably sure had been placed there deliberately by Walsh, who had walked past the open door without stopping or looking in, but at a pace slow enough to ensure the cup was noticed. Small gestures, she had learned to track them. She put on headphones, not because there was audio to process, but because headphones told everyone who walked past the open door that she was in the focused state that should not be interrupted, which was both true and useful to communicate without having to say it. Then she started working. The archive was exactly what she had expected. Comprehensive, well-organized by standard processing criteria, and completely blind to the specific pattern she was looking for. The analysis software was excellent at what it had been built to do. It was not built to look for what wasn't there. She was. She moved through intercepts chronologically starting 6 weeks back, applying the pattern recognition she had been developing for 11 days across the broader data set. Most of what she processed in the first 40 minutes confirmed existing assessments. Tactical communications. Logistics coordination. Nothing that changed the picture. Then at the 43-minute mark, she found something. An intercept from 22 days ago, processed and filed as a routine coordination transmission. Low priority. The standard analysis had extracted 3 items of tactical relevance and marked the rest as noise. But the noise wasn't noise. She sat forward. There it was. Not the word meridian. Not any direct reference. But the shape of an absence, a gap in an otherwise continuous coordination pattern that occurred at exactly the interval she had identified in the more recent intercepts. Precisely the same interval. Precisely the same frequency band shift during the gap. Precisely the same resumption pattern afterward. 22 days ago, which meant the timeline she had been working from was wrong. Not because she had made an error, because the operation she was tracking had begun earlier than any of the intercepts she had been working from. The 11 days of patterns she had identified were not the beginning of the timeline. They were the middle of it. She pulled up the archive further back. 4 weeks. 5. 6 weeks from today. There. Again and again. The pattern was consistent, going back 41 days, which meant Project Meridian had been in an active operational phase for 6 weeks, not 11 days. And if the communication discipline she was observing was representative of the overall operational security of the network, then what she was seeing in the signals data was not all of the network's activity. It was the portion they were willing to risk, the tip of something that was being kept deliberately, carefully, and skillfully below the surface. She looked at the data for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone on the desk and called Walsh's direct line. Walsh answered in 2 rings. Carter, how long is the Admiral's 30 minutes? A pause. He's still in the room. I need him out of the room, she said. Now. Another pause. Longer. The kind that means someone is deciding something quickly. Give me 5 minutes. It was 4. Calloway came through the door with the civilian 2 steps behind him and Walsh 1 step after that. All 3 of them looked at her with the focused attention of people who have been interrupted from something important by something they immediately understand to be more important. She turned the center monitor toward them. The pattern goes back 41 days, she said. Not 11. The operation is 6 weeks into an active phase, which means the attack timeline I estimated based on 11 days of data is wrong. She paused. It's significantly shorter than I thought. Calloway said, how short? She looked at the data one more time, then at him. Based on the communication density increase I can track over the past 6 weeks, the way the pattern compresses as the operational date approaches, I believe the primary event is between 8 and 14 days from now. The civilian said, primary event meaning what exactly? I don't have the target yet, she said, but based on the infrastructure focus of the cell we surveilled and the scale suggested by the communication architecture of the broader network. She paused. I believe we're looking at a simultaneous, multi-target action. Not sequential, not a rehearsal. The real thing. Calloway's jaw was tight. Evidence basis. She walked him through it, every data point, every identified gap, every place in the archive where the negative space told its story to anyone who knew how to read it. She spoke quickly and precisely the way she always spoke when the information was time-sensitive, without unnecessary qualifications, but with honest uncertainty stated explicitly when it existed. When she finished, the room was silent for almost 10 seconds. The civilian spoke first. Who else has seen this? You 3, she said, and me. He nodded once, turned to Calloway, said something in a tone just below conversational volume that she caught the shape of but not the specific words. Calloway straightened, looked at Olivia. We are going to need you in a different room with different resources and different support. He paused, starting immediately. Is there anything you need from your current quarters before we move? She thought about it. The notebook. Walsh already had it. She set it on the desk without a word. All right, Olivia said. At 17:42 hours, Olivia Carter walked out of the secure analysis room and down a different corridor than any she had used before in this building, escorted by a rear admiral and a civilian whose name she still didn't know toward a room that she had not known existed an hour ago. The Barrett was still in her pack. She had not been asked to leave it behind. She took that as information. The new room was larger, better equipment, 3 analysts already in place, each of whom looked up when she entered with expressions that combined the focused intensity of professionals in the middle of something complex with the specific alertness of people who have just been told that someone is coming who has something they need. Calloway said, "People, this is Captain Carter. She owns the Meridian analysis as of right now. Full cooperation, full resource access, full authorization." He looked at her. "What do you need first?" She set the notebook on the nearest desk, looked at the 3 analysts, looked at the monitors they were working on. "I need everything you have on domestic network communications in the Pacific Corridor for the past 8 weeks. Unprocessed raw data. And I need one of you who understands frequency correlation to sit with me for the first hour while I walk through the pattern, because once you see it, you'll be able to run parallel tracks and will move twice as fast." One of the analysts, a young woman with the sharp, tired eyes of someone who had been doing this for 12 straight hours before Olivia walked in, raised her hand approximately 2 inches. "I can do that. What's your name?" "Lieutenant Vasquez." "All right, Vasquez." She pulled a chair to the desk. "Let me show you what I'm looking for." At 1800 hours, Hayes arrived. She heard him before she saw him. His voice in the corridor outside asking a question, receiving an answer. The brief pause of a man absorbing information he hadn't expected. Then he appeared in the doorway, still in his field uniform from that morning, looking at the room and then at her with an expression that had moved beyond recalculation into something simpler and more direct. "Walsh told me," he said. "She kept working." "How much?" "Meridian, the timeline, that you're running the analysis." He paused. "Is it real?" "Yes." He came into the room, stood beside the desk, looked at the monitor she was working from, the 41 days of pattern data that had made Calloway stand up mid-meeting and move. He stood there for a moment processing it. 8 to 14 days, he said. "Yes. And we didn't know. The standard process wasn't built to find it," she said. "Nobody failed. The system worked exactly as designed. The design just didn't account for this specific approach." He was quiet for a moment. "But you found it." She looked up at him. "I've been looking at this kind of data for 6 years, Commander. You develop a sense of where the edges are, where the picture being shown to you and the picture that exists aren't quite the same shape." She paused. "Most of what I've found over 6 years has been useful. This is the first time it's been urgent." He pulled a chair and sat, not at the desk, slightly to the side where he could see what she was doing without interfering with it. The posture of a man who has decided to be present without being in the way. "What do you need from me?" She glanced at him. "Can you get me direct communication access to the forward operating base that has the signals equipment deployed near the contact zone from this morning? I need them to run a specific intercept protocol tonight if the network is active. I can have that inside an hour." "Then that," she said. He stood, pulled out his phone, and began making calls. Right there in the corner of the analysis room, managing logistics with the same controlled efficiency he had used to manage the ambush in the mountain valley. No fanfare, no discussion of the significance of the moment, just the work. She turned back to the monitor. Vasquez was already running the parallel track she had described, moving through the archive with a quick pattern, matching attention of someone who had heard an explanation once and immediately understood it well enough to apply it. She was good, fast, precise, the kind of analyst who would get significantly better in the next hour just by working beside someone who had been doing this for 12 years. At 1834 hours, Vasquez said, "I found one 31 days ago. Secondary frequency, band different cell than the primary thread." Olivia leaned over and then looked at the screen. "Yes," she said immediately. "That's it. Mark it. Build the correlation matrix from that point forward, and let's see what the network density looks like when we include that secondary thread." Vasquez marked it, built the matrix, pulled it up on the center screen. And the picture that assembled itself was worse than Olivia had estimated. Not catastrophically worse, but measurably. The secondary thread added 17 data points to the pattern, each of which slightly compressed the operational timeline estimate, each of which added specificity to the network scale. She looked at it for 10 seconds. Then she said, "Hayes." He was off the phone by the time he turned. "What? How quickly can you get Calloway back in this room? He looked at the screen, then at her face. He knew her face well enough by now. 8 hours was enough to learn the specific quality of Olivia Carter's expression when she had found something significant to read it accurately. 10 minutes, he said. 8 would be better. He was already calling. Vasquez looked at Olivia. She was 26 years old, had been working in signals intelligence for 3 years, and had grown up in San Antonio in a family of school teachers who had been very surprised when she joined the Navy. She had a sharp mind and an honest face, and she looked at Olivia right now with an expression that combined professional focus with the very human response of someone who has just understood that they are inside a situation significantly larger than the one they started the day in. Is this as bad as it looks? She asked. Olivia considered lying. It would have been easy. She was a very capable liar when the situation required it, and most situations she encountered professionally never required it because she simply didn't volunteer the uncomfortable truths until they were needed. But Vasquez had asked a direct question, and she was going to spend the next 8 to 14 days minimum in this room working on this problem, and she needed to be able to trust what Olivia told her. It's bad enough to take seriously, Olivia said. Not so bad that we can't get ahead of it if we move correctly from here. Vasquez nodded, turned back to her monitor. Then let's move correctly. Calloway arrived in 9 minutes. He stood behind Vasquez and looked at the expanded matrix on the center screen. He stood there for a long moment without speaking, which in a man of Calloway's professional experience and natural verbal fluency meant the information was being processed at a depth that went beyond immediate reaction. Then he said, Captain Carter, what do you need to be certain? She had been thinking about this since the matrix appeared on screen. 48 hours and direct access to the intercept protocols from 3 additional collection assets in the region. I need to cross-reference against independent collection rather than relying on the single archive thread. If the pattern holds across independent datasets, the certainty level moves from the mid-70s to the low 90s. You'll have it by Euro 600 tomorrow, Calloway said. All 3 assets. She nodded, and after 48 hours, she said, I will tell you exactly what they're planning, when they're planning to do it, and what we need to stop it. The room was very quiet. Hayes was standing near the door, arms crossed, watching the whole thing with the focused stillness of a man who has found the terrain of a situation and is already thinking about how to move through it. Calloway looked at him. Commander Hayes, your team. Hayes straightened. Ready. Keep them ready, Calloway said. I think we're going to need them again before this is over. He looked at the matrix one more time, then he looked at Olivia, and in his expression, which was the controlled, carefully composed face of a man who had spent 40 years maintaining the specific discipline of not letting what he felt show in situations where feeling too much could cost lives, there was something unguarded for just a moment. Something that looked like, where have you been? And how did we miss this? And how many other things have we missed the same way? She held his gaze for exactly as long as it took to acknowledge that she had read all 3 of those things correctly. Then she turned back to the monitor. Because the work was not finished. The work, in fact, was just beginning. And Olivia Carter had never in her life walked away from a thing that needed to be done simply because the doing of it was harder than the day had originally planned to be. Vasquez was still at her station running the correlation matrix forward, her face lit by the monitor in the quiet analysis room, her hands moving with the quick precision of someone who has found her rhythm inside a problem worth solving. I've got another one, she said. 28 days, Northwest Corridor, different frequency, same interval signature. Olivia leaned forward. Show me, she said. Vasquez found 4 more intercepts before midnight. Each one tightened the picture. Each one compressed the timeline, slightly shaved another half day off the outer edge of the window, pushed the certainty number up by 2 or 3 percentage points in a direction nobody in that room wanted it to go. By 2200 hours, the analysis room had acquired 3 additional people, 2 more signals analysts and a targeting specialist named Lieutenant Commander Reeves, who had been pulled from a different project without being told why until he walked through the door and saw what was on the center monitor, at which point he had said nothing for approximately 30 seconds and then sat down and started working. Hayes had stayed. Nobody had asked him to. Nobody had asked him to leave either, which in a room being run by a rear admiral with a civilian observer present was itself a form of authorization. He managed logistics from the corner, working his phone in the quiet, steady way of a man who understood that the most useful thing he could do in this specific environment was remove every obstacle that wasn't directly connected to Olivia Carter's analysis before she encountered it. Extra archive access, an additional secure line, food that appeared on the desk at 20:15 hours, sandwiches and coffee without anyone discussing food being needed. Rodriguez texted him at 20:45. Team is standing by. What's the status? Hayes typed back, standby continues. Sleep if you can. Rodriguez replied, nobody's sleeping. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Olivia, who was working through her third consecutive hour of raw archive data with the focused intensity of someone who has found the thread of a story and cannot stop reading until the ending is clear. She had not looked up from the monitor in 40 minutes. She had consumed approximately half a cup of coffee and ignored the sandwich entirely. Vasquez, to her credit, had eaten her sandwich in 3 bites without breaking her working rhythm, which Hayes had noticed and silently approved of. At 22:17 hours, Olivia stopped, not gradually, completely. Her hands, which had been moving across the keyboard with the quick precision of someone navigating a familiar system, went still. She leaned back in her chair by exactly 2 inches. She was looking at the screen with an expression Hayes had not seen from her before, and he had spent the past 17 hours learning to read her expressions with the same careful attention she had applied to the mountain terrain that morning. He crossed the room. He looked at the screen. He did not understand everything he was seeing because signals intelligence pattern analysis was not his primary specialty, and the specific notation system Olivia and Vasquez were working in required context he didn't have. But he understood enough. He understood the shape of what the data was showing. I understood the circled reference in the center of the matrix, and the 7 connecting lines radiating from it, and what 7 connecting lines from a single reference node in a network communication pattern meant about the centrality of whatever that reference was. Ain said, "Is that what I think it is?" Olivia said, "Meridian isn't the operation." The room went quiet. Vasquez stopped it typing. Reeves looked up. The 2 additional analysts turned in their chairs. "It's the coordinator," Olivia said. "Meridian is a person." The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Hayes said, "Call Calloway." She was already reaching for the phone. It was 22:19 hours, and everything they had understood about the threat for the past 6 hours had just changed. Calloway arrived at 22:31. The civilian was with him. Neither of them had gone home, which told its own story about what they had understood from the Matrix presentation earlier. Calloway came through the door, looked at Olivia, and said without preamble, "Talk to me." She turned the monitor toward him and walked him through it in 4 minutes. She did not editorialize. She did not build to it. She laid the evidence in sequence and let the conclusion arrive at its own velocity. Meridian appeared in 23 separate intercepts across 6 weeks. Never as an operation name, never attached to a location or a target or a timeline. Always referenced in the context of authority, decisions attributed to it, approvals routed through it, concerns escalated toward it. The communication pattern around the name was not the pattern of an operation being referenced. It was the pattern of a command hierarchy being respected. A person, Calloway said. Someone with direct authority over at least 3 separate cells, Olivia said. Someone whose decisions are final. Someone who is never physically present in the communications. I cannot identify a primary transmission node for this individual, but whose influence is present in essentially every significant decision the network has made in the past 6 weeks. The civilian said, "Foreign or domestic?" "Unknown," she said. The authority structure is consistent with someone who has operational training at a high level. The way decisions are communicated, the specificity, the security discipline, the contingency planning, evident in the network's responses to unexpected events. This is not someone who learned to run an operation from an ideology. This is someone who was trained to run operations by an institution. Calloway and the civilian exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. "Military background?" Calloway asked. "Or intelligence," she said. "The operational security methodology has characteristics I've seen in both, but the decision-making pattern, the way Meridian manages risk, the way the contingencies are structured, that reads closer to special operations doctrine than pure intelligence tradecraft." She paused. "Someone who has been in the field. Someone who has operated under pressure and built their methodology from actual experience rather than theoretical training. The room was very quiet. Hayes had not moved from his position beside the desk. He was looking at the monitor with an expression that was doing several things at once, processing the tactical implications, running operational scenarios, and underneath both of those feeling the specific weight of what it meant that someone with a background like the one Olivia was describing had built this network and pointed it at American infrastructure. "How do we find him?" Reeves asked. It was the first thing the targeting specialist had said in 2 hours, and it landed with the particular directness of a man whose entire professional purpose is answering exactly that question. Everyone looked at Olivia. She had been thinking about this since the moment the pattern had resolved itself into a person rather than an operation. It was the question behind the question, the one the data pointed toward with increasing urgency as the timeline compressed. Finding the network was useful. Stopping the attack was necessary, but Meridian was the architecture. Meridian would rebuild whatever was dismantled if Meridian survived. The communication pattern suggests a dead drop protocol for primary transmissions, she said. Meridian doesn't send and receive directly. Messages are staged, retrieved, responded to through intermediaries, which is why I can't locate a primary node. There isn't one in the conventional sense. She paused. But the timing pattern of the dead drop retrievals is not perfectly random. There are two intervals that recur with a frequency that suggests a biological rhythm rather than a security protocol. Vasquez looked up. A schedule. A habit, Olivia said. Someone who was trained to vary their timing, but who has been operating long enough that the variation has developed a pattern of its own. Every security discipline degrades over time. This one has degraded enough to be visible in the data. She reached forward and indicated two specific clusters in the matrix. These intervals, 41 to 43 hours apart, consistent across the full 6-week window. If Meridian is retrieving communications on that rhythm, and if we can identify where the dead drops are positioned, we can be there when retrieval happens, Reeves said. We can be there when retrieval happens, she confirmed. Calloway said, how do we identify the drop positions? There are 3 intercepts in the archive that contain what I believe are encoded location references, she said. They're embedded in what was processed and filed as irrelevant coordination data. I need tonight and tomorrow morning to decode the location methodology and cross-reference against geographic patterns in the network's operational footprint. She looked at Calloway directly. I told you 48 hours and the certainty level would be in the low 90s. I'm revising that. I think I can give you a target location for Meridian in 36 hours. The room was very quiet for a moment. Hayes said, and the attack timeline? She looked at him. Still 8 to 14 days. But if we locate and neutralize Meridian before the attack window, the network loses its coordinator. Without Meridian, the operational discipline that makes this dangerous collapses. Individual cells may still attempt something, but the synchronized simultaneous multi-target action that the communication pattern suggests that requires a conductor. She paused. We take the conductor, we change the music. Calloway stood straight, looked at the civilian, made a decision that was visible in the set of his shoulders even before he spoke. You have the resources. You have the access. You have 36 hours. He looked at Hayes. Commander, I need your team at 12-hour readiness, beginning at 0600 tomorrow. Hayes said they'll be ready in 6. Calloway nodded, looked at Olivia one more time. Captain Carter, what do you need for tonight? She thought about it honestly. Vasquez, she said, and more coffee. Vasquez, without looking up from her monitor, raised her cup. They kept working. At some point between 2300 and 0100, the building settled into the specific quiet of a place where serious people are doing serious work past the hour when most of the world has gone to sleep. The overhead lights had been dimmed at Vasquez's request, which made the monitor screens brighter by comparison and easier to read over extended periods, a small adjustment that would matter a great deal over a long night. Reeves had stepped out at midnight to make calls and came back 20 minutes later with 3 additional archive access codes that he set on the desk without comment. The 2 additional analysts cycled through in shifts, handing off their running tracks to each other with the quiet efficiency of a team that had learned to work together in exactly this kind of sustained, high-stakes environment. Hayes slept in the chair in the corner for 40 minutes at 0:05. She noticed because she noticed everything, and because there was something in the specific quality of his presence, even asleep, the alertness that didn't completely leave him, the way his position maintained a natural sight line to the door even in unconsciousness, that told her he had never fully stopped being the person responsible for what happened in that room. She did not find it intrusive. She found it, against her own expectations, somewhat steadying. The first encoded location reference decoded at 0147 hours. She almost missed it. She had been moving through the methodology she had built from the intercept patterns and applying it to the three candidate transmissions, and the decoding process was painstaking enough that it required the kind of sustained attention that becomes difficult to maintain cleanly after 18 consecutive hours of high-intensity cognitive work. She had compensated for this by moving through the material more slowly than she would have at hour 4 or hour 8, double-checking each step before proceeding to the next, which cost time but preserved accuracy. And then the pattern resolved, a location, partial, 2 of the 3 coordinate components encoded in the transmission. Enough to establish a geographic area. Not enough to establish a specific site, but it was a start. She said Vasquez. Vasquez rolled her chair over immediately, looked at the screen, said, "Oh." "Yes," Olivia said. "Run the second candidate transmission through the same methodology. I'm going to the third." "On it." At 0203 hours, the second decoded. Vasquez found it at the same moment Olivia found the third, and they looked at each other across the desk. Then they both looked at the geographic overlay on the center monitor. 3 partial coordinates, 3 transmissions. When overlaid on a regional map and cross-referenced with each other, the partial coordinates were not 3 separate locations. They were 3 components of a single location distributed across 3 transmissions as a security measure. You needed all 3 to identify the point. You needed to know they were related to look for all 3. You needed to have seen the pattern that tied them together to know that they were related at all. The location was a facility in the North Bay region. Commercial front logistics company operating for approximately 8 months with a completely legitimate surface profile. Olivia looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached over and put her hand on Hayes' arm. He came awake in approximately 1 second, looked at her, then at the screen. "That's it. That's where the retrieval is happening," she said, and based on the timing pattern, the next retrieval window is in approximately 31 hours. I was completely awake now. The 40 minutes of sleep had done what it needed to do. "Can you confirm it's Meridian personally or just the network's dead drop location?" "I can't confirm yet which individual makes the retrieval," she said. "It could be an intermediary, but given the authority structure I've identified, the way Meridian manages risk and maintains personal control, my read is that this level of operational security is being managed directly. Someone this careful doesn't delegate the most sensitive part of their own communication chain." Hayes looked at the screen for another 3 seconds. Then he stood and picked up his phone. "I'm calling Callaway." "It's 0204, she said. "Yes," he said and dialed. Callaway answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was alert in a way that suggested he had not been deeply asleep. "Hayes." "We have a location," Hayes said. "Carter needs 30 minutes to brief you." A pause. "I'll be there in 20. He was there in 18. He came through the door, looking at the map overlay before he had fully cleared the frame. He studied it in silence for 45 seconds. Then he looked at Olivia. "Walk me through the confidence level." She walked him through it. The 3 transmissions, the distribution methodology, the cross-reference, the geographic overlay, the 31-hour window. She was precise about her certainties and equally precise about her uncertainties, because this was not a situation where optimism served anyone. When she finished, Callaway said, 78% that this is a primary dead drop location, 63% that Meridian makes the retrieval personally. "Yes," she said, "those numbers will improve if the signal's activity from the facility location increases in the next 12 hours, which it should as the retrieval window approaches. Active dead drop sites show a characteristic communication pattern in the 24 hours before retrieval. You'll be monitoring." "I won't stop monitoring," she said. He nodded, turned to Hayes. "Commander, if Carter's location is accurate and the retrieval happens in 31 hours, I need a surveillance package at that facility within the next 6 hours. No contact, no interdiction, observation only until I say otherwise." Hayes said, "Done." and I need your assault element staged and ready. Already staged, Hayes said. Calloway looked at him. I said 12-hour readiness. I know what you said, Hayes said simply. There was a brief pause and then something moved through Calloway's expression that was very close to approval. All right, he said. Carter, keep going. Hayes, brief your team at 0600. I need to make calls. He looked at the map one more time. Good work, he said, not casually, with the specific weight of a man who had been in this business long enough to know what that phrase meant when it came after a night like this one. He left. Vasquez exhaled slowly. I have never had a rear admiral tell me good work before. How does it feel? Olivia asked, already turning back to her monitor. Vasquez thought about it. Terrifying and excellent simultaneously. That's usually accurate, Olivia said. They kept working. At 0312 hours, the characteristic pre-retrieval communication pattern Olivia had predicted began showing up in signals data from the facility location, low-level, subtle, exactly consistent with what the archive data showed in the 24 hours preceding the two previous retrieval windows she had identified. She marked it, logged it, updated the confidence assessment to 84% on the location and 71% on personal retrieval. She sent the updated numbers to Calloway's secure line as a text message and received a single word back in 11 seconds. Understood. At 0430 hours, Hayes came back from briefing his team. He came through the door and stopped in the middle of the room and looked at her in the way that meant something had happened that he needed to manage before he said it. She looked up from the monitor. What? He sat down in the chair beside her desk. Not the corner chair, the one next to the desk where the conversation would be between them. I need to tell you something about the team brief. All right. Webb asked to be on the surveillance package. She processed that. The surveillance is observation only. He knows that? He asked anyway. He did. Hayes paused. He said, he stopped, seemed to be deciding how to render something precisely. He said that if we're going to be in the same operational theater as Captain Carter's analysis, he wants to be the one responsible for making sure the ground around her is clear. The room was very quiet. Olivia looked at Hayes for a moment, then at the monitor, then back at Hayes. Tell him the ground around me is generally my own responsibility, she said. I did. What did he say? He said he knows that. A pause. He said he wants to be useful anyway. She was quiet for a moment, long enough that it was a real silence, not a transitional one. Tell him yes, she said. Hayes nodded. I already did. She turned back to the monitor. But something in her posture shifted slightly in the way. Posture shifts when a tension you have been holding for a long time quietly releases its grip by one precise degree. She had carried the weight of being the person nobody wanted in the room for so many years that she had stopped noticing the specific feeling of carrying it. She only noticed it now because it was slightly lighter, just slightly, but it was real. 8:05:17 hours, she found the fourth encoded location component. It had not been in the 3 transmissions she had initially decoded. It was in a 4th transmission, 17 days old, that she had initially assessed as unrelated. But the same methodology that had decoded the first 3 resolved it with the same characteristic pattern, and the 4th component did not contradict the location she had identified. It confirmed it. The confidence level moved to 91%. She sat back in her chair. Vasquez was asleep with her head resting on her folded arms on the desk, which was fine. She had been working for over 12 hours. She had earned the 20 minutes. Reeves had left at 0400 to coordinate the surveillance package logistics. The 2 additional analysts were running passive monitoring tracks. Hayes was at his phone again, managing the staging details for the assault element that was going to need to move the moment Calloway gave the order. The room was quiet. The monitors hummed. The coffee was cold. She looked at the map on the center screen. The location in the North Bay. The facility that had been operating for 8 months as a logistics company with a completely legitimate surface profile. The place where in approximately 26 hours a person called Meridian was going to attempt to retrieve communications from a dead drop they had been using for 6 weeks. She thought about what it meant. Not just tactically. She let herself think about it fully, the way she rarely allowed herself to think about the larger shape of the work she did, because the larger shape was sometimes too large to look at directly without losing the focus the details required. Someone had built this. Someone with the training and the patience and the operational sophistication to construct a multi-cell network with communication security that had evaded detection for over 6 weeks. Someone who understood how signals intelligence worked, how analysis chains process data, what the negative space in communications look like, and how to use it deliberately. Someone who had used every tool of the craft against the institutions that had built and maintained and taught that craft. And the only reason they were 26 hours from identifying them was that an intelligence officer with a rifle had gone on a mission. Nobody expected her to influence and notice the wrong things in the right way and written 32 lines of analysis in a notebook on a helicopter because the data wouldn't stop speaking to her. She looked at the notebook, which was on the desk beside the monitor. 32 lines. She thought about the 6 years that had preceded those 32 lines. The assignments, the careful, thorough, excellent intelligence work that had mattered for real even when it was invisible. The moment she had seen things the analysis chain missed and worked around the limitation because the path of least resistance was working around it rather than creating the institutional friction required to challenge it. The Barrett in the pack. The combination lock set to her partner's birthday. The choice she had made 6 years ago that had cost her one career path and opened a different one, and the fact that she was sitting in this room at 0517 in the morning, running the most significant domestic threat analysis in her career, was in the most precise possible sense the direct result of that choice. Because if she had completed the mission and left Marcus Holt in that mountain 6 years ago, she would have been moved back into a precision shooting role. She would have continued on the trajectory that her original assignment had placed her on. She would not have spent 6 years building the specific analytical capability that allowed her to read negative space in communications data the way she read it. She would have been somewhere else tonight, and the network would be invisible. She did not know what to make of that, whether it was meaning or coincidence, or simply the universe's indifference arranged by chance into a pattern that looked like something. She was not a person who spent much time trying to decode the meaning of the path that had brought her to any given place. She was a person who used where she was. She turned back to the monitor. At both 6:12 hours, Hayes stood and stretched and looked at her. "When did you last sleep?" "I slept 4 hours yesterday afternoon," she said. "That was 22 hours ago." "Yes." "Carter." She looked at him. 2 hours, he said. "I will personally watch the monitors and wake you the moment anything in the signals pattern shifts. Vasquez is here. Reeves is 30 seconds away by phone." He paused. 2 hours. "The surveillance package isn't in position for another 4. You are not going to miss anything that cannot be managed while you recharge by 120 minutes. She looked at the monitor, then at him. He was standing in the specific way that communicated without drama that he had made this decision and was not going to unmake it, regardless of what she said, which was the posture of someone who had learned to maintain a position under pressure through approximately 17 deployments. "Wake me if the pre-retrieval signal density increases by more than 15%, she said. "Yes." "Or if Calloway calls." "Yes." "Or if Vasquez finds anything." "Carter." "Yes," she said. Two hours." She pushed back from the desk, crossed to the small couch along the wall that she had been aware of for 6 hours and had not used, and lay down with her arm over her eyes. She was asleep in 4 minutes. Hayes sat down at the desk, looked at the monitors, looked at the notebook, looked at the map. Then he looked at Olivia Carter, asleep on the couch in an analysis room at 0616 in the morning, 26 hours out, from a location that she had found by looking for what wasn't there. He had commanded a lot of people in a lot of places, under a lot of different conditions. He had worked with brilliant analysts and exceptional operators and people whose courage had taken forms he would spend the rest of his life measuring other people against. He had never worked with anyone quite like this. He picked up the notebook. Read the 32 lines again slowly, the way you read something when you want to understand not just the content but the mind that produced it. Each line was precise. Each line connected to the next with the internal logic of a person who saw the shape of things whole, not in the sequential steps that most people require to approach a complex problem. He set it down, looked at the map, 26 hours. He picked up his phone and texted Rodriguez. Get some sleep. It's going to be a long day tomorrow. Rodriguez replied in 30 seconds. Already told you, nobody's sleeping. Hayes put the phone down and kept watch. Hayes woke her at 08:14. I didn't say anything. He just put his hand on her shoulder, once firm and brief, and when she opened her eyes, he was already stepping back toward the desk. She was sitting upright in 4 seconds, not because he had been urgent about it, because the specific quality of the silence in the room had changed, and she read the change before she was fully conscious. Pre-retrieval signal density, he said, up 23% in the last 40 minutes. She was at the desk in 8 seconds. Vasquez was already running the updated correlation. Reeves was on the phone in the corner. The two additional analysts had come back sometime during her 2 hours and were tracking parallel threads with the focused intensity of people who understood that the window they had been working toward for the past 14 hours was opening. She looked at the data. Read it in 45 seconds. He's moving toward the retrieval window, she said. Earlier than the 41-hour interval suggested, either the rhythm has accelerated or something in the network has changed that requires earlier contact. Which is more likely, Hayes asked. Both are possible, she said. If the attack timeline has compressed further, Meridian would need to push the retrieval forward to maintain operational coordination. She looked at Hayes directly. Call Calloway. The window may be closer than 31 hours. Hayes was already calling. Calloway answered in one ring. Hayes put it on speaker. The signal density shifted, Olivia said without preamble. 23% increase over 40 minutes. The retrieval may happen within the next 16 to 20 hours, not 26. A silence of 3 seconds on the line. How confident? 79% that the window has moved, she said. 91% that the location is correct. Is the surveillance package in position, Reeves, Hayes said. Reeves lowered his phone from his ear. Package is staged, 4-person element. In position as of 30 minutes ago. He paused, waiting on authorization to move to closer observation. Calloway said, authorize it, and Hayes, get your team moving. Hayes said, they've been moving since year 600. Another brief silence. Of course they have, Calloway said, and the line went dead. The next 4 hours were the particular kind of tense that doesn't announce itself loudly. No dramatic moments, no sudden revelations, just the slow grinding weight of watching data and waiting for a human being to make a move that everything indicated they were going to make, while knowing that indicated was not the same as certain, and that the gap between those two words was where operations failed. Olivia watched the signals data. Vasquez ran continuous correlation tracks. Reeves coordinated with the surveillance package through encrypted communication. Hayes managed his team's positioning from the corner of the room with the quiet competence of a man who had been moving people through dangerous situations for his entire adult life. At 10:43 hours, the surveillance package reported movement at the facility. A single individual, entering through a side access point, not the main entrance. Reeves relayed the description. Olivia listened without moving. Then she said, consistent with operational security behavior, main entrance avoidance is standard for someone who assumes surveillance possibility. Do we have visual confirmation on identity? Hayes asked Reeves. Negative on confirmed ID, Reeves said, but the surveillance team says the approach pattern is deliberate. Their word, deliberate, like someone who has done this before. Hayes looked at Olivia. She said it's him. Not a certainty, a read. The kind of read that comes from 12 years of building a picture of how a specific kind of person moves through a specific kind of situation. She could not prove it yet, but she felt it in the data the way she had felt the wrongness in the terrain on the inbound movement 4 days ago, that whisper in professional instincts that had never once lied to her. Hayes picked up his radio. Team, stand by for possible execute. Olivia said, not yet. He looked at her. If we move now, we get one person who may or may not be the principal, she said. If we wait until the retrieval is complete, we get Meridian with physical evidence of the communication chain in hand. We also get whatever the dead drop contains, which is going to tell us the rest of the network's operational plan. Hayes held the radio. That's a harder arrest. It's a better case, she said, and it's a better picture of what we're stopping. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he keyed the radio. Team, standby continues. Do not move until say. Reeves relayed the hold to the surveillance package. The room went very quiet. At 11:12 hours, the surveillance package confirmed retrieval. The individual had accessed the dead drop location, was in possession of the physical communication package, was moving toward the exit. Reeves looked at Olivia. Olivia looked at Hayes. Hayes said into the radio, "Execute." What happened in the next 6 minutes she experienced from the analysis room, through the surveillance team's radio traffic and Reeves's running relay. She had done this before, sat in a room and listened to an operation unfold in real time through the compressed, fragmented language of operators managing a dynamic situation. She had always found it harder than being there, not because she needed to be in the action, because the distance between her and the people she was responsible for protecting was a specific kind of difficult that she had never found a way to make easier. The individual attempted to run. The surveillance team had anticipated this. Webb's elements stage at the secondary exit per Hayes' positioning 30 minutes earlier was exactly where they needed to be. The individual was contained in 40 seconds. Reeves said, "Package is secure, individual is in custody." The room exhaled. Vasquez put both hands flat on the desk and breathed. Reeves said, "They're asking for a confirmation on identity. The individual is not carrying documentation." Hayes said, "Carter, is there an identification methodology in the signals data that we can cross-reference against?" She was already looking. The communication pattern includes 2 physical description references embedded in the early intercepts. Indirect, but specific enough. She read them off. Cross-reference those against what the surveillance team has. Reeves relayed, waited 20 seconds, then looked up with an expression that was the professional version of someone who has just watched something resolve exactly the way it needed to resolve. "Confirm match on both references," he said. "Individual is Meridian." Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Then Vasquez said very quietly, "We got him." And Hayes said, "Carter got him." He said it matter-of-factly, not as a compliment designed to make her feel recognized, as a statement of operational fact, the way he would report the successful engagement of a target or the confirmation of a location. Simple, direct, true. She did not respond to it. She was already pulling the communication package contents onto her monitor. The surveillance team had photographed them immediately and transmitted via secure channel, and reading what Meridian had retrieved, what the network had been communicating, what the next 14 days had been planned to look like. She read for 6 minutes without speaking. Then she said the primary event was in 9 days. Simultaneous actions against 4 infrastructure targets. The Pacific Communication Grid, 2 water treatment processing nodes, and a financial data routing center. She paused. The network had 11 active participants beyond Meridian. The package contains contact protocols for all of them. She looked at Calloway, who had arrived at some point in the past 20 minutes. She had not noticed him come in, which said something about how focused she had been, and was standing near the door with the civilian. "Give me 4 hours with this package," she said, "and I will give you the location of every remaining active participant in the network." Calloway said, "You have 6. She said, "I'll need 4. She needed 3 hours and 40 minutes. When it was done, she pushed back from the desk and looked at what she had built. A complete network map, 11 individuals, 11 locations. The operational plan that Meridian had spent 6 weeks coordinating and 9 days from executing. All of it visible now, laid out in the clean, devastating clarity of a picture that had been hiding in plain sight behind the negative space of what wasn't being said. She thought about the mountain 4 days ago, the team pinned in the valley rounds cracking through the morning air, and the intelligence officer who slipped away into the tree line while everyone was watching the fight. The Barrett in the pack, the ridgeline nobody else had assessed as accessible. The 18 minutes. She thought about Walsh sitting across from her in the debrief room, asking why she had stayed in the assignment. Because the work needed to be done. That was still true. It had always been true, and sitting here now, looking at what the work had produced, she understood something she had not fully articulated to herself before. The 6 years had not been a detour. They had not been a punishment she had endured or a limitation she had worked around. They had been the specific path that led to this room, this data, this moment. Every assignment, every analysis, every time she had looked at a communications pattern and seen the shape of what wasn't there. Every hour she had spent building the capability that the sniper role would never have required her to build. All of it had converged in this room in these 4 days, in the face of a threat that the standard process was not built to find. She had been built to find it. Not by accident, not by luck, by the choices she had made and the choices that had been made for her, and by the stubborn refusal to become less capable than she was simply because the room she was in at any given moment didn't require her full capability. Hayes came to the desk. He looked at the network map on the monitor. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said 11 locations. Simultaneous takedowns will require coordination. Calloway is already on it, she said. He looked at her. You briefed him while you were building the map. I sent updates every 30 minutes, she said. He didn't need to wait for the finished picture to start moving pieces. Something moved through Hayes's expression. The specific quality of a man who keeps discovering that the person beside him was 3 steps ahead of the moment he was currently in. Of course you did, he said. She shut down one of the secondary monitors, began organizing the network map documentation for transmission to the operational elements that would execute the 11 simultaneous takedowns. Precise, methodical, the work of someone who understood that the analysis was not finished when the answer was found. It was finished when the answer was in the hands of every person who needed it in the form they needed it at the time they needed it. At 1600 hours, Calloway came to the desk. He stood beside her for a moment without speaking. She kept working. He let her. He had learned in the past 36 hours exactly how much her working time was worth, and he was not a man who wasted things of value. When she reached a natural stopping point, she looked up. He said, the recommendation that Hayes co-signed, I've moved it through a different channel than the standard one. She waited. It's been accepted, he said. Effective in 72 hours, you are reassigned to a special operations intelligence role that more accurately reflects your full capability profile. Full field authorization. Full equipment authorization. He paused. No more personal equipment manifests. She looked at him. You won't need them, he said. Everything you are carrying under the weight limit will be listed explicitly. She was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of someone processing something real, not constructing a response. Thank you, she said. The same 2 words she had said in the debrief room when he told her about Marcus Holt. Still the simplest, true thing available. Still enough. He nodded, started to turn away. Admiral, he turned back. The 3 operators in the Pacific region capable of this kind of analysis, she said. The 2 I know with certainty, and the 3rd who has the instincts. They need development support, not reassignment, not removal from their current roles. Development support, someone to work with them on the specific methodology. She paused. I can do that concurrently with the new assignment. He looked at her for a long moment. You're asking me to let you train your own replacements. I'm asking you to make sure the capability doesn't exist only in me, she said. That's not a good operational security posture. Something in Calloway's face shifted with the quality of a man who had just been reminded, not for the first time in this case, why this particular person was different. Approved, he said. He left. Hayes was behind her. She had known he was there for the past several minutes. She turned around. Howe was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his expression carrying the specific weight of someone at the end of something significant who was trying to hold it all at once. The mountain, the debrief, the 36 hours, the map on the monitor. All of it. Webb asked me to tell you something, he said. She waited. He said he owes you a conversation about first impressions, and he intends to have it when this is over. He said, and I am quoting him precisely because he made me write it down. He said the person carrying the notebook understood the battlefield better than anyone holding a rifle, and that he is going to spend a significant amount of time thinking about why it took him as long as it did to see that. She looked at Hayes. He wrote that down, she said. He wrote it down, Hayes confirmed. Webb doesn't write things down. I have known that man for 4 years, and I have never seen him write anything down voluntarily. A pause. He wrote that down. She turned back to the monitor, finished the last section of documentation, sent it through the secure channel to the 11 operational elements that were already moving toward 11 locations where 11 people were about to discover that the network they had trusted had been mapped by an intelligence officer who learned to read what wasn't there. She saved the final file, closed the archive, picked up the notebook. 32 lines written on a helicopter at sunrise that had become the beginning of everything that followed. She looked at them for a moment, Then she put the notebook in her kit bag beside the Pelican case with the combination lock set to her partner's birthday. Hayes pushed off the wall. "Get some real sleep tonight," he said, "and tomorrow is going to be a long day." "Tomorrow is always a long day," she said. "Carter." She looked at him. His expression was direct and unguarded in the way it only got when he had decided that the professional distance required by their respective ranks was less important than what he actually needed to say. "What you did in the past 4 days, the mountain, the debrief, this room, this map. I have been in this job for 17 years. He stopped, started again. "I have never seen anything like it." She held his gaze. "Yes, you have," she said quietly. "You just weren't looking." I was still for a moment. Then he nodded, once. The kind of nod that means something has been permanently filed. "Fair enough," he said. She picked up her pack, walked out of the room. In the corridor, the building was returning to its ordinary rhythm. People moving with purpose, voices carrying the compressed professional energy of a place where serious work happened daily. Nobody looked at her. Nobody stopped. She was a captain in a uniform walking through a hallway indistinguishable from 100 other people who had walked this hallway today. She walked at the same pace she always walked. She carried the same pack she always carried. And inside that pack, beside the rifle that had changed a battlefield in 18 minutes, was a notebook with 32 lines that had stopped an attack 9 days before it happened and dismantled a network that nobody else had been able to see. She had not needed anyone to know what she was capable of. She had only needed one moment to prove it. And when that moment came on a ridgeline at sunrise, in a helicopter, at altitude, in an analysis room at 3 in the morning, she had been ready. She had always been ready, because that was what preparation meant. Not waiting for permission to be what you were. Not reducing yourself to the shape of the room you were standing in. Not letting the assumptions of others become the ceiling of your own capability. It meant doing the work every day, in every assignment, with every piece of data and every intercept, in every ridgeline, and every moment when the world needed someone who had never stopped being exactly what they were trained to be. Captain Olivia Carter walked out of the building into the late afternoon light of Coronado, California, and she did not look back. She was already thinking about tomorrow.